Someone up in the far corner has a great deal of empathy. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the closing plenary of your amazing forum. It's not really the closing, of course. Eliot once more, in my end is my beginning. Your forum ends today only in the sense that you leave Oxford and go back to work. The forum carries on in your work all through the year. It carries on in the relationships you have with each other. It carries on in the renewed energy you give each other and in the difference you make. The forum isn't an event. It's a stream. And if you think I'm going to step into the same quote twice, you're entirely wrong. As some of you know, I'm not new to this family. But I hadn't really understood until this week how much your comparative advantage is each other and the trust you place in each other. Every single conversation, suggestion, and story I've heard was premised on really staggering amounts of trust. And it's been incredibly impressive to see. You do really brave things. You focus on where you're going and not what's in the way. You're crazy in the ways that Eve Ensler would have you be crazy. You are, above all, generous. You share your luck and you share your energy. We have a wonderful final discussion for you now. I've been reading Zoe Williams' work for years. That is no exaggeration. It's amazing in its breadth and in its depth. When Zoe and I met on Wednesday, she challenged me to an arm wrestle. This augurs well, I think, for the panel discussion. Zoe is going to introduce her very distinguished panel, but it's my pleasure to introduce you to Zoe. Zoe.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Lost in the Noise, Amplifying Untold Stories in the Age of Flux. We have a very distinguished panel with us today, but first, I'd like you to watch this film.
If we can't stop the seas rising, if you allow for a 2-degree rise in temperature, you are actually agreeing to kill us. I have an objective, which is to save a nation. I know it's a huge task. I've been arrested 12 times. I've been tortured twice. I spent 18 months in solitary.
We won our battle for democracy in the Maldives. A year later, there are those who tell us that solving climate change is impossible. Well, I am here to tell you that we refuse to give up hope.
I do like a battle, though.
It won't be any good to have democracy if we don't have a country.
Everything is worse than we originally thought. It's got much, much worse.
This is a mission, and I have to get it done. We need
a deal in Copenhagen, and I feel that Maldives can be instrumental.
President Nasheed, do you think you will get a deal that you think is worthwhile? I presume that you don't want to sign a national suicide note.
Some leaders here say these are the toughest negotiations they have ever been involved in.
India, China, the United States, big emitters, Prime Minister, they're not going to go along with that. It's hundreds of millions of people. You know, Manhattan is as low as the Maldives. This is just one instance when Maldives is asking our friends to help us. We just can't disappear. We just can't.
We asked Mohamed Nasheed, then president of the Maldives, to join us. He said yes. It was tremendously exciting. There is no leader in the world whose situation better embodied the urgency of change and who could articulate it maturely and tackle it head on. Sadly, he has had to decline. Let's hear him explain why.
Let me start by saying hello from the Maldives to all of you at the Skoll World Forum in Oxford. I was hoping to be with you in person, but I'm with you instead in spirit. The Skoll World Forum attracts some of the world's brightest minds. You have the power together to change things. And even though the past 2 months have taught me brutal lessons, I still believe in positive change. On February 7th, the Maldives suffered a coup d'etat. Some of the police and the military joined with elements from the former dictatorship, seized the main television station, trashed the office of the ruling Maldivian Democratic Party, and forced my resignation with threats of bloodshed. In the days that followed, many Democrats, including sitting MPs, were beaten and imprisoned. Our young democracy was left bloodied and bruised. This is a big world with far bigger countries than mine, so you might ask yourself why any of this matters. It matters because the Maldives is a bellwether for some of the world's most important issues. My country has become well known as a frontline state in the battle against climate change. Our islands sit just 1.5 meters above the ocean and are especially vulnerable to sea level rise. But what happens to the Maldives today happens to the rest of the world tomorrow. We are the canary in the world's carbon coal mine. Maldives is also relevant for other international issues. We have become something of a precursor for democracy in Muslim countries. What happens here seems soon to happen elsewhere. My country became a democracy in 2008, shaking off the autocratic strongman Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who had ruled our islands for 30 years. We held the first free and fair multi-party elections in our 2,500-year history. We ran on a ticket of civil liberties and democratic change, and we won. This victory mattered a lot to us, and to others as well. We did not know it then, but we were a precursor for change. 2 years later, the Arab Spring blossomed across the Middle East. Other young people were also prepared to fight for political freedoms and better life. It was all going so well. But I fear now that the Maldives, such a strong forerunner to the Arab Spring, could become a foretaste of a new Arab winter. Until last month, our new administration was on track to deliver our election pledges. And for the first time, Maldivians were free to speak their minds publicly, vote for a political party of their choosing, and read a newspaper that wasn't censored by the state. But dictatorships don't always die when the dictator leaves office. The new administration inherited a looted treasury, corrupt police, and a rotten judiciary that ensured nobody from the former regime could be prosecuted, and in doing so paved the way for their return. Today we are calling on the new regime to end police violence, respect fundamental rights, and hold fresh presidential elections. We believe that Maldivians, like other people everywhere, deserve a democratic government, not enforced down the barrel of a gun but chosen through the ballot box. I hope you will stand with our pro-democracy movement in the Maldives and with the Maldivians. We applaud all of you at the Skoll World Forum for creating positive change in your own countries. And we stand with you in your efforts to improve the world. Thank you.
So it's wonderful to have Mohammed Nasheed here in spirit, if not in person, and we can help him by spreading the word about the film, which is out today, here and in the US, and by continuing to talk about him and his country and their fight for democracy. Just because the Maldives is small doesn't mean it should be a smaller story. And to discuss exactly that, how easy it is for stories to slip off the global agenda and how important it is that they don't, let me introduce the panel. Gidon Bromberg is the Israeli director of Friends of the Earth Middle East, which brings together environmentalists from Jordan, Palestine, and Israel, initially to share water. Their opening principle was, you do not want a thirsty neighbor. From that starting point, they've built a cooperation that is awe-inspiring, and frankly, if you're familiar with the way Middle Eastern conflict is discussed, as I'm sure you all are, a bit baffling. Gidon, along with his Palestinian and Jordanian counterparts, has been honoured across the international community for his achievement. He's a former winner of a Skoll Award, of course, the Euromed Award, and the Aristotle Onassis Prize. Welcome. Arianna Huffington is, of course, the editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post, the most influential, linked to, talked about, venerated site in the world. She occupies this unique position of being the first to grasp the possibilities of the platform, while at the same time having the contacts to turn it into an instant VIP room. If the epoch maker could be a person, it would be Arianna Huffington. Welcome. And finally, Karl Pope is a veteran environmentalist and has been with the Sierra Club for 30 years, political director, conservation director, executive director, chairman, and now senior strategic advisor. Nobody in this room will need to be told what the Sierra Club has meant to the environmental movement, but it's heartening just to stand back and admire the sheer size and scope of it. 120 years old, 1.2 million members, voted the Aspen Institute the most environmentally influential organization in the US. So, thanks for coming, everybody. Gidon, you must have had a lot of this in your work, the sense that people don't want to hear the story, or the story they want to hear is the wrong story.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the greatest problems we encounter is the level of noise that the Middle East attracts. And all that noise is about hatred and animosity and violence. So our challenge is how to overcome that, how to empower residents, mayors, parliamentarians, and in the end, our political leadership to strike that deal that we desperately need. So we've designed a program that works both bottom-up and top-down. We bring Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian youth together to learn about their water reality and their neighbors' water reality. And of course, to see the interrelated nature of that water reality. Because in the midst of conflict, when all the voices are about violence and hatred, you have to focus on self-interest, on concrete self-interest that you can touch. And that's what water presents. So we bring youth, we bring adults, we bring mayors. We've brought the mayors of the Jordan River, Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli, to come and see the back door, the raw sewage flowing down the Jordan River. I don't know how many of you know, but the Jordan River south of the Sea of Galilee doesn't flow anymore. 98% of its waters have been taken and it's turned into a sewage canal. So bringing the mayors, after working with students and adult residents to create that constituency of support, turned the issue around. It made the mayors aware that they're the common losers. They're losing together because this resource has been turned into a sewage canal rather than a river that can attract half of humanity, because holy to half of humanity. But the way of having those voices heard is extraordinarily challenging. It only happens by design. It only happens by empowering the mayors, the adult residents, parliamentarians, to stand up and defend themselves. Because in the midst of conflict where we're from, and I want to mention Nada Khatib, my Palestinian co-director, is here as well. In the midst of conflict, you can't just stand up and say, we're going to work together. You'll literally be shot down. And we've had several of our mayors shot at. If you can't defend yourself, if you can't first and foremost come and say, it's in my interest, it's in our people's national interest to deal with these problems, and the fact that the problem is transboundary, it's in both people's interest. So enlightened self-interest comes second. It's the direct, concrete self-interest that has to be explained, that has to be shouted out, and hopefully heard before we can move forward. And that's what all of our activities are about.
Thanks. Karl, you must have spent your life saying pretty unpopular things, right?
Well, I spent my life saying things that I didn't say very well, and that made them unpopular. But I actually think that the focus on clutter is actually a mistake. Mm-hmm. It's not always the case that truth beats falsehood, but it is always the case that a good story always trumps a bad one. We are all inundated with data, with information, with spin, with messages, with marketing. We are all actually hungry for true story. And I think that, speaking, I don't want to address this as an audience from around the world, and everybody's story is different, and everybody's way of telling that story, and everybody's storytelling tradition is different. But if I look at my movement in North America, the story we have told people for 30 years about climate change runs like this. There is this very complicated scientific phenomenon called global warming or climate change. We can't decide which means that every time you light up anything, you are actually killing somebody in Bangladesh and should feel bad about it. And if we don't do something about it, something we can't quite measure yet won't happen in 30 years to somebody you've never met. And as a consequence, it is time for shared sacrifice. You're all going to walk home, right? You're not going to burn that jet fuel. The thing about that story is two things. One, it's not very motivating. But second, it's not the whole truth. Because the implicit message in that story is the reason we are burning fossil fuels the way we are is because it's good for us in every other way. This is something wonderful we're being asked to give up. Because fossil fuels are cheap, they're the key to economic empowerment, they're the secret to growth, they're what makes a country great. So using less of them is a sacrifice. Well, in 15th century Oxford, sewage ran through the streets. I do not believe the present residents of Oxford believe that giving up open sewers was shared sacrifice. And the fact is, fossil fuels aren't cheap. We've been told they are, but they actually aren't. Right now, for more than half of the people in the world, there is an alternative, a renewable energy solution that is cheaper. Ignore the long-term costs, ignore climate. But out of pocket, there is a better way to light your house, get to work, power your vehicle. Coal and oil are actually very expensive. We don't use them because we're cheap. They're cheap. We use them because we're in the habit of using them, and we're told they're cheap, and we repeat it. So the key to changing all of this is to think through the story we're trying to tell and say, what does that story have to sound like on the other side of a low-carbon world? What is the story that will make us happy we went to a low-carbon world? And that is work we have not yet done.
Years with Karl. Has he ever written anything for you that you've thought this is scary. This is obviously this is fabulous, but this is too scary to print.
No, never. And actually, I think that Karl has been an amazing storyteller, and I think the picture that he painted is actually something that should all make us sit up and think, how can we tell the story better? But I don't think there is a better storyteller around this issue, including bringing humor and satire the way Karl demonstrated now. I think one of the problems has been the media's false sense of objectivity. Yeah. You know, the idea that an objective media reporter should not take a stand on global warming, on evolution, practically on whether the Earth is flat or not. You know, not quite, but that's what makes a reporter objective, that I sit here and I interview, on the one hand, Karl Pope, talking about the dangers and the opportunities, etc., around climate change. And on the other side, Senator James Inhofe, for example, who believes that global warming is a fraud. And my job is to simply give them a forum and let the public decide. Now just think of it. This is absurd. Because the jury is out on this issue. It's not, you know, of course, you can always find a scientist in the pay of Shell or Exxon who is going to say something different, you know, on every issue. But the media have been largely responsible for what is happening around big existential threats, because they have this Pontius Pilate approach to the truth. It's as though there is no such thing as truth. And my job, if I'm going to be an objective reporter, is to just basically give you an opportunity to make your case and then move on to the commercial break. And a related issue with that is the way that the media are looking at everything at the moment through the prism of right versus left. Yes. Which, you know, at the Huffington Post, our reporters are not allowed to use these two words, period. Wow, they need to find ways to describe what is happening without using this caricature, because you cannot look at the biggest problems of our time through this prism. Right now, though, if you ask the average person in the street, they would say, oh, if you believe in global warming, you must be on the left. Or if you want the troops to leave Afghanistan, you must be on the left. The fact that 69% of people in America at the moment want the troops to leave Afghanistan is just a minor issue that does not trouble people. Maybe the left has grown dramatically in the last 2 weeks. Or, you know, the fact that we obsessively write about questions of the fate of the middle class, downward mobility, poverty, then we must be liberals on the left or whatever. And we really need to fight that, because I feel that if we look at everything as right versus left, we marginalize positions which need to be mainstreamed in order to be successful in an accelerated way. Yeah. Yeah. Because in that way, then everything good at some point was left, right? You know, women's emancipation, the civil rights movement, okay. But that's not really the way to approach change for the future.
I mean, you found the press to be an obstacle in many ways, right?
Yes, the press feeds the fear, and it actually disempowers individuals that are willing to come out and say that we need justice, that we need to find that justice by working together, to not support them, to not enable them to hear those voices, but on the contrary, to condemn them as collaborators, because so much of the fear that we see is our leadership, and I would say the media is there with it, is following what they see as the street. Even though when we look at the opinion polls, time after time, we see the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians wanting a two-state solution. Yet if a resident, a mayor, a MP comes and speak to that manner, then of course they're barraged by betraying the tribe, as someone else said in an earlier panel. And we've had the experience where our staff are taken away. We've had a local staff person taken away by a member of the Tanzim and condemned. He was fearful that he was going to be harmed, possibly killed, because he was working with his Israeli neighbor to try to stop the wall being built. But if you don't empower, and I think that's the greatest challenge, and we find that challenge in a completely different level because we risk our lives, and not only in the Middle East, but in so many of in the midst of really violent conflict. If you don't empower those people who are raising their voice to defend themselves, to say to the member of the Tanzim, an armed militant group, that I'm the collaborator, I've managed to stop the wall to divide my community from the rest of humanity, and I'm the collaborator. What have you done for my community? What have you done for our people? And that takes incredible bravery. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. That's how you get those voices heard way above the violence and the rhetoric that there is no partner, that peace is not possible. How many times are we told in the media by our politicians that the media then just heighten their voices by, indeed, peace is not possible, that we're naive, that we're dreamers, that we're not connected to the ground. Well, we're speaking the truth, and we're not able to have our voice heard to the height that the fear is receiving, that the fear gets attention to. And that's the great challenge that we face.
So, I mean, Karl, how do you see public perception having changed? Because there is a theme emerging here that people, the truth seems to be more subjective. If you want to believe that, then that's up to you. Certainly in terms of the way it's presented in the media.
Well, I think it's a mistake to focus so exclusively on the media. Because, in fact, I don't think there ever has been an era in which the media actually created human community. The media is not what sticks us together as a species. What sticks us together is our shared experiences.
But there have been great journalists.
If you
take Upton Sinclair, he helped change the perception of what was happening around that time.
Yes, and he brought information from one part of society to another part of society, and that's phenomenal. But I actually think, speaking only in the American experience, our media right now is treating us as a group of disparate tribes. And if we simply expect the media to fix that, I think that's a bad strategy. I don't think the media is going to fix that. I think we need to go out and consciously create community. And eventually, if we create the community, the media will come to reflect that imperfectly. But I think that there have been great journalists, Edmund Burrow, but those journalists were working with material that came up from the community. They didn't create that community. They were taking material that came up from the community. And I think that the work is to create that material and those stories and to tell them face to face and to live them. And then I think you can sit back and say, okay, now how do we tell this story effectively in the media for people we can't reach face to face? How can we have movies like that one? How can we have outlets like Huffington Post? But I think we too often try to communicate indirectly with people that we want to have a relationship with.
I mean, Arianna, I'm sure you're going to disagree with that because you see a huge role for campaigning.
I don't really think, when we say the media, we don't mean just journalists.
Mm-hmm.
We mean movie makers, we mean novelists, we mean every form of communication that is not face-to-face. And it's not either or. Of course we need to build communities. I mean, I absolutely we do. But also we need a megaphone and we need a sense of urgency and we need to be able to scale the community messages. And one of the things that I love since we are in England, one of my most inspiring stories was about Benjamin Disraeli, who before he became Prime Minister of England knew that he had to capture the imagination of his people. And he decided to write a novel. Before he ran for Prime Minister, he wrote Sibyl, which was a novel intended to capture the imagination of the English about what was happening in the country, what was happening to children being sent down to the mines, what was happening, he called the country becoming two nations divided by indifference. That was his term. In a sense, his medium was the novel. Jeff's medium through the participant work he's doing is the movie. You know, our medium at the Huffington Post is providing a platform for thousands of people to tell their stories to millions of people, and also staying on a story. That's the other thing that's so important. It's not just doing something great, it's staying on it every day. We, for example, have 26 reporters now all around America telling the story of American poverty, which is really an underreported story. It's just amazing what's happening. And to see right now all the different implications. We cut policemen around in Stockton. We just did a story about that. Crime is increased dramatically. Drive-by shootings. You know, everything has consequences. And the American poor are really not at all in our consciousness. The increase in homelessness, all these things. But it's not just one story. It's like the repetition that makes the difference. And that's where we do have a great advantage. Because if you think of it, mainstream media often suffered from ADD, you know, attention deficit disorder. There would be one big story on the front page of the New York Times, and then they would move on to the other big story. Well, we in the new media suffer from OCD. It's like obsessive compulsive disorder, you know. We take the stories that matter to us and we stay on them again and again and again until something happens, because ultimately we want something to happen. We don't just want to report the story.
I mean, Gidon, you must have seen this, even trying to keep politicians interested or the international community interested. I mean, people have a very short concentration span.
So people from our news like to hear the good news of the environment. So they're focused on the environmental side of our stories, of the need to rehabilitate the River Jordan because it speaks to them, or to save the Dead Sea. But the politics behind it, they're very reluctant to cover, and particularly in our own media. So maybe the international media will delve more to the politics. But if we talk to the politics to our own media, then we're no longer covered. Or they'll cover us in a completely tribal fashion. They'll cover us in the fashion that, oh, the Israelis are taking all of our water, and that's the Palestinian perspective. Or the Palestinians are purposely polluting all of our groundwater from the Israeli perspective. They refuse to cover in more detail, to see the grey and not just the black and white. And therefore, responsible media, like responsible leadership in any field, is absolutely essential. Otherwise, we're constantly following the street rather than leading change.
I mean, Karl, were you born wanting to be a contrarian, or did you just see...
No, I don't think so. But I mean, when I stopped being a generalist who had to manage a lot of things and was well briefed, but honestly not well informed, and began to dig into things, I kept running into things that everybody knew that just turned out not to be true. I mean, everybody knows that coal is cheap and abundant, right? Well, it's not. And one thing I want to point out is this question of the media versus community is very interesting, because I was involved in a project about 15 years ago that was looking at how Americans understand the world. And the researchers concluded that if you looked at the way the world is presented in the American media, Americans ought to have a certain vision of the world as a nasty, vicious, hopeless place. And yet Americans did not, in fact, see the world that way. So the question was, where were they learning the truth? Because they were not actually able to learn the truth from the mainstream media that they saw in foreign affairs. And the conclusion was they learned the truth because they knew people who had been business people overseas, had been service people overseas, had been Peace Corps volunteers, had been missionaries. They knew people who actually had experienced the truth. And we have a number of people here, for example, from Kiva. Now, I don't know how many lenders Kiva has, but every lender that Kiva has a story of a loan they made, and almost always a story of that loan getting repaid by somebody who is much poorer than they are. Now, that is a framing device for the way Americans understand how they relate to the world's poor that I think is probably worth a good deal more than most of America's daily newspapers.
Thank you. I mean, with that in mind, Arianna, do you see newspapers basically ending pretty soon and the Huffington Post being the main news source?
I don't actually see newspapers ending at all. I see I see a hybrid future.
Okay.
Where more and more of the best newspapers, including The Guardian, I think The Guardian has done great work online, are adopting the best things of the web, and where digital natives like the Huffington Post are adopting the best of traditional journalism. I mean, we now have 490 reporters and editors, and we have been able to do the kind of original reporting that we could not have done at the beginning.
But that's not me.
That we could not have done at the beginning. But at the same time, I think part of the linked economy is going to be aggregation.
Right.
So, you know, even if I had $1 trillion budget, I would still aggregate, because our promise to our readers is that we are going to bring you the best on the web, whether we produced it or we found it and curated it. And by doing that, we are sending traffic back to the creators. If you do aggregation responsibly, it's completely win-win. And that's one of the things that but for me, in a way, even more exciting than the journalism, which is always going to be incredibly important, is the Huffington Post as a platform. The fact that we now have 40,000 bloggers with their own password, and I would love to give a password to everybody here, because these voices need to be heard and amplified. And we don't care about it being original. We want you to cross-post whatever you are doing. Because for me, the key is going to be repetition. I can't tell you how much I believe that. It's not, it's like the message around social entrepreneurs. If we can have 1,000 blogs, videos, slideshows every day, we are going to break through. And I believe that even before there was an internet. In 1993, I went to see Brian Lamb, you know, the creator of C-SPAN, in Washington. And I said, you know, you have C-SPAN 1, which covers Congress. You have C-SPAN 2, which covers the Senate. And I said, can you create C-SPAN 3? Now there are many other C-SPANs, but at the time there are only 2. Can you create C-SPAN 3? I said, I will devote my life to it. That will cover people giving back. I said, in the same 24/7 way that we are covering the House and the Senate proceedings. Just think of it, 24/7, you have a channel that covers what's happening in the United States House of Representatives. What a shame, what a waste of time. What about if we had, at the time, the 24/7 covering social entrepreneurs, so that if you couldn't sleep one night, you could turn on your TV and see something that might be the catalytic moment that would get you involved. Well, now we don't need C-SPAN. We have the internet. So that's my dream. That's what I want to have there. We now have the impact section, and Brian Sergutz, who created this here. We have the good news section on the Huffington Post. But I want us to have a lot more. I want us to have multiple sections that cover this, so that, because I really believe that this is going to be the positive infection, that people can catch it, because it's inside us. We all have that longing and that instinct to give back. We just need more opportunities to tap into it.
I would say it's really about empowering. It's empowering people to have their voices heard, rather than waiting for someone else to solve our problems. And I think of the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, signed 30 years ago, and that handshake on the White House lawn between Begin and Sadat with Carter behind. All of the efforts of peacemaking, 99% of the efforts of peacemaking, are leveraged, are focused on creating that handshake. Now look at that handshake today. 30 years later, that handshake is literally shaking from side to side and threatens to collapse because there is no foundation holding that handshake. It's voices, and hearing the voices of the hundreds of thousands of the people that need to make up that peace that's going to really be the foundation for peacemaking or for any serious long-term sustainable change that we desire.
I mean, Karl, from what you say, it does sound like you've lost faith if you ever had any in top-down movements, and you're much more into the bottom-up. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I lost it very young. I mean, I spent 2 years, very important years, in a small village in eastern India, and came away with an understanding of I had wonderful social entrepreneurs who were stuck inside the bureaucracy, trying to do what they were supposed to do as healthcare workers. And I watched how a top-down system could make it impossible for even the very best, most dedicated human beings to get done. So I then sort of gave up on top-down. But I think the problem with the bottom-up approach is we tend to tribalize, we tend to silo. Yeah. We tend not to reach out. It's work. And we somehow have to find tools that make it more rewarding, so we'll all do more of it. We're not going to do more of it by willing it. We have to make it easier for ourselves to reach out and communicate with other people. And that, I actually think, is the wonderful opportunity that the new media gives us. It gives me a way to create a community with 250 people who share some strange obsession of mine. And to be in touch with them regularly.
Tell us about your strange obsession.
What?
Tell us about that.
Oh, I'm obsessed with the price of coal. I think being obsessed with the price of coal is a strange obsession. But somebody on this list of 250 people sent me a spreadsheet with every coal mine that served the Chinese economy and where it was located and what the qualities of its coal was and what it cost, and said, "This is fascinating." And well, okay, I mean, but I owed him something, so I wanted to find something fascinating. So it's an Excel spreadsheet. So what do you do with an Excel spreadsheet? Well, you sort it. And what do I care about? I care about the price. So I sorted it by price. And it turned out that in 2010, 8 of the cheapest coal mines that served China's appetite for coal were in Indonesia. And that told me a lot about the actual power relationships that actually underlie. And I was able to share that with 250 people who shared the obsession. So they're now all able to use that information. And man, can you imagine trying to get that story out with a press release?
Yes.
Not on your life. Now, I'm going to end with this, with a hopeful image, which I hope you'll be able to talk us through. So, it's not quite there yet. There we go. Who are these gentlemen?
So we see mayors, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli, jumping into the last stretch of clean water in the River Jordan. They're jumping in together on pretty much an annual event, not because they're friends, because they've come to understand, because of the kids in their community, the adult residents in the community that have forced them to understand that they're the big losers. And it's the community voices being heard that have given them the courage, because so many of our leaders don't have courage to jump into the River Jordan together. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Ariana. Thank you, Gidon. Thank you, Karl. I don't know about you, but I don't always experience your forum in an entirely linear way. I can't quite remember if Hans Rosling predates Gordon Brown. or whether George Soros is one of the world's greatest singers. If you'd like a quick reminder of what you've been doing, here's a short film to bring back some memories. Welcome, new friends and old, to the marvel that is the Skoll World Forum.
What is happening here is that people are willing to be disruptive, be imaginative, be creative, take risks, have failures, push the edge. And I think my experience has been that is the only place that real change comes from.
And the finding was incredible. Between the age of 15 to 25, the #1 priority for young women that age was economic independence.
The positive energy and momentum that you get out of this is unparalleled.
There's a lot of learning that takes place because there are people who are really have incredible expertise.
Celebrating the, hope and celebrating achievements.
You come here and you see all these social entrepreneurs, and they have lights in the middle of their foreheads, bright eyes, and you know that they are fighting the good fight, and you get the privilege to meet them while they're in the middle of it.
Why is it that we couldn't complement these huge global changes by an ability to coordinate the way we make decisions so that global problems which need global solutions can have globally coordinated action to deal with them?
Government funds are almost the only funds where we have a right to get.
But it's also about the politics, and the people who make these decisions and after them and just appealing to their conscience.
The attitude of the government and the attitude of the donors, the attitude of the powers that be has been changing towards us.
You can go to conferences to be inspired, you can go to conferences to meet people. Here you go to be better at being a social entrepreneur.
I look forward to this every year. This is one of the high points of the year. It also feels a little bit like coming back to summer camp.
Just out of curiosity, has anyone in this audience ever failed? Okay.
I think there's a real possibility that we can make progress.
We need an Olympic truce now to pursue diplomatic solutions as urgently as we will pursue gold medals this summer.
One bright woman hit upon the great idea of raising ducks instead of chickens. Because after all, what are ducks if not flood-proof chickens?
I have a suggestion for a new name for what has been labeled the developing world. I think it should be called the world.
To be a social entrepreneur, you have to be misunderstood for at least 10 years.
A lot of work's been done to rebuild and to restore and to put better governance into cooperatives in a lot of countries.
I'm so proud what we're doing because it's changing and they actually standing up themselves now. They can walk.
President and CEO of the Skoll Foundation, Sally Osberg.
Thank you to all our awardees for showing us how to find new and better ways to change the world. We celebrate Arvind Singh's spirit and achievements, and we are extremely pleased to give him the 2012 Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. Gawad Kalinga, thanks to Landesa. Proximity Designs,
Eileen is one of our survivors of human trafficking. At the age 14, she was trafficked into cybersex, but eventually she became one of the strongest leaders.
The Skoll family, I think, is my only international family.
goosebumps. What a forum it's been. I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm a little bit giddy and a little bit exhilarated and a little bit exhausted. We've been warmed by the sun and by each other. We've been in plenary, in workshop, in convening, in panel, in moderations, in connections, in the collab, in receptions, and at dinner. We've seen films and still photographs, graphs and slides. We've heard at least one cello, a string quartet, seen dancers, and been to a jam. And we heard Annie. I learnt a lot from you this week. I'm not sure I can really do justice to what I've learnt, but here's a highly selective list of some things that stand out. I learnt that impossible problems aren't impossible. They're just very hard. I learnt that we should all get more sleep. I learnt that the global village needs elders. I learnt that voles are more interesting than I thought. I learnt that being outrageous matters. I learnt that the cracks are where the light gets in. I learnt that we must tap into the timeless to solve the urgent. And around those fragments, I also felt a collective belief that we must link the fact-based world with the meaning-based world. That some of the mechanistic models we've built are no longer adequate. We look at the world as if it's chess when it's Jackson Pollock. That's Khan Ross, that's not me. And I felt that mass mobilization in person, in dance, in technology is on your agenda. I have cried every day this week. And remember, as I tell you this, that I'm male. And British. And from Oxford. I cried when I heard Nick Danziger. I cried when I heard Eve Ensler. I cried when I heard Annie Lennox. I cried in Pat Mitchell's panel and when I saw the films at yesterday's awards ceremony. I also smiled a lot. I smiled at the Olympic torch. I smiled at Larry's socks. I smiled at the images of the survivors' trafficking. I smiled at you all and your demonstration that what it takes to change the world isn't, in the end, mostly about facts and money. In the end, it's mostly about people and collaboration. As Deborah Dunn said yesterday, if the stakes are high enough, you have to collaborate. We know the stakes are high. Imagine if this event gave us back mass mobilization. That would be harnessing flux. It's time now for me to thank you for being here and to wish you safe journeys home. I look forward very much to seeing you next year, and will leave you not where we began with T.S. Eliot, but with the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. Nothing is intrinsically good, he wrote, except goodwill. You have goodwill, and I'm grateful to you for sharing it this week. Thank you and goodbye.